Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this session on navigating uncharted waters, addressing Afghanistan's water crisis. I'm Christina Leeb. I work with the World Bank, and I will be your moderator for today. Today's session is really about the people in Afghanistan, 40+ million people who are dealing with a water crisis. And what we're going to be talking about is the status of the water resources in Afghanistan, as well as what the international community can do to help with it. Afghanistan is really rattled by intensifying climate shocks. You probably remember the reports and photos from the floods in July. The country is also exposed to prolonged droughts, and it's predicted to dry up even further with climate change. Within the country, there are significant service gaps. We have like a quarter of the population without safe access to safe drinking water, about half without access to safe sanitation. And the decades of conflict have basically sort of led to an underdeveloped water sector. A lot of the farmland doesn't have any irrigation, which poses a lot of food insecurity risks for the population. But I don't want to talk too long because we have an excellent panel of experts who work in Afghanistan, have worked in Afghanistan, who are at universities researching. And I will introduce each one of the speakers. We have 5 speakers right before the presentations. And then after the presentation, we'll have a panel discussion and then open up the Q&A for the audience. So I'll welcome our first speaker, Mr. Fayez Azizi, who will talk about the state of Afghanistan's water resources, so the status of the surface and groundwater resources. Mr. Azizi is currently a PhD student and research collaborator at the Institute of Earth Surface Dynamics at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. And he's focusing on glacial lake outburst floods, flood risks in the context of climate change. He also holds a master's degree from Ruzmeikan University in Japan, where he focused on watershed management and water resources management. And I will hand over to you, Mr. Azizi, to share with us your presentation on the status of the water resources in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Can you hear me, Christina?
I can hear you, yes. Perfect.
Can you see the slide?
Yes, perfect. We can see it.
Okay, thank you very much, Christina, for inviting me. The topic that today briefly I will present here is Afghanistan water resources status. So as you are looking at this in this map, that based on the hydrological boundaries, Afghanistan water resources is divided in 5 major river basins and 25 sub-river basins. The rivers and also the people, actually around 85% of people in the rural area depends on the river basins, on the water resources of the river basins. And these water resources of the river basins depend actually to the high elevations and mountains of Afghanistan that is create around 27%, which is above 2,500 elevations, is supply water to the remaining geographical part of the country, which is around 82% from these high mountains. These high mountains is not only regulating water resources to the country, but also regulate the climate to form a lot of glaciers, snow, and also glacial lakes as a natural storage for supplying the water resources. So we have installed during 2004 to 2021 a large number of monitoring stations with the financial support of World Bank. And these stations is widely used to monitor and assess the status of surface and water resources. The distribution, temporal and that spatial and temporal distribution of water resources in each river basins is depend to the climate, amount of precipitation, and the topography. Here, the data in projection is showing that Afghanistan is in the water resources potential of Afghanistan is decreasing both in surface and groundwater resources. Is that put Afghanistan water resources as a water-stressed country based on the water availability index and the population and water demands. There is two main other pressure on the water potential of Afghanistan, that is increasing of water demand and climate change, which is driving to decrease the water potential in water resources potential in Afghanistan. From 2008 to 2022, around 12%, that is account 8.5 billion cubic meter, is decreased compared to the historical period. So here you are seeing very details on the each river basins, that stream flow. The stream flow or changing in the country and the river basins is different from one region to another region, but there is a high variation between the rain-fed river basins to the snow-fed and glaciated basins, which is dramatically decreased, and we have seen a massive decrease of mean water peak in the Harirud Mirghab River Basin and Helmand River Basins, which is about 50 to 48%. And also we are observe a flow regime and also a shift regime change on the Kabul River Basin and Panji Amur River Basins, which this flow regime change and also shifting on peak is significantly will be impact to the irrigation and water allocation on the downstream. The snow is as a main factor of the formation of water resources, but under the climate change scenario, our study is showing that we will have a snow melt increase in the winter and also in the spring, but the snow melt will be decreased in the summer. But there is projections is decrease of snow melting and also snow coverage area during the full season and under both scenarios in the 21st century, which around 50 to 34% of decrease, but the maximum decrease will be on the summer. That is why we will have a earlier snow melting, which caused the earlier snow water peak on the river basins. Afghanistan glaciers are rapidly shrinking, retreating, and also melting, and as a result of climate change. From 2019 to 2020, around 14% of the total area of glacier is lost. And where this glacier is served as a source of fresh water for a large number of Afghanistan on the mountains region, which on the arid region like a country Afghanistan's. And this changing of glacier will significantly impacts to the water resources in the country. That is on the water availability, changing on the seasonal flow regime, and even though on the hydropower generation and production on the downstream. As a consequences and a result of glacier resistance and retreating, the glacial lakes the new glacial lakes are formatting, and also the existing glacial lakes are expanding. And there is also a risk of glacial lake outburst flag on those mountains regions in the future. So the slide here is that showing a showcase of a groundwater status on the Kabul city. And this is a practical example of the situation, what is going on the groundwater situation in the whole country in Afghanistan. So there is an average around 60 meters between 2000 to 2020 and reached to around 70 meters of the declining of water resource. And this is big because of around 70% of people in the Kabul city is not access to the water supply. And there is also an overuse and excessive extraction of water resources for the agriculture, for the industries, for the greeneries, and also for the public baths. And the absence of surface water resources and for the Kabul city. So and also there is lack of watershed management practices to also to reach the infiltration rates for the groundwater and groundwater aquifers. So the drought in flood or increasingly is increasing and as a cycle of water resources in the country. In this drought in flood or a frequency, intensity, and severity or increase during the past years, which is caused a shortage of water resources and also water scarcity for the consumption of the human rights and also a shortage for the agriculture in the whole the country. By this, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Azizi. This is I hope you can hear the applause from the audience. Thank you. This was very useful to set the scene and really sort of explain the dynamics of the resources and water resource availability, both surface and groundwater due to climate change and the melting glaciers and the loss also of the snow cover. I will get back to you during the panel discussion because I do have some questions that I hope we can then address. But first I want to go to Dr. Richard Trenchard, who will join us from Dubai. Dr. Trenchard is the country representative for the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in Kabul, in Afghanistan, and he has been there since August 2021. He has more than 25 years of experience working on humanitarian crisis and development issues to support the Agenda 2030. He will talk to us on water, livelihoods, and food security in Afghanistan, and really sort of focus on the impacts on the people and agriculture. Richard, over to you. I hope we can get you on screen.
Christina.
Perfect.
Christina, and can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Great. So thank you very much indeed, Christina. I'm delighted to be here today for one simple reason. It's absolutely vital to put Afghanistan back on the global water agenda following the August 21 political transition, because it's in the midst of an ongoing water crisis in the country. There's both domestic and regional implications for Afghan people's livelihoods, their food security, but also future economic growth in the country and peace and security. Our dear brother Azizi has shown you the science, he's shown you the numbers, he's also raised the alarm bells. What I want to do is try and show you in the next few minutes what this means for Afghan people. I'm actually in Dubai today on transit, but I've been in Afghanistan for the last 3 years. I arrived August the 10th, 2021, just 5 days before the transition. And since then, I've had the chance to visit about 80% of the 34 provinces, talking to farmers, talking to elders, walking in fields. The most frequent words that I've heard in those conversations are uba, ab, ow. That's water, water, water. It is absolutely critical in Afghanistan today, particularly for the 75% of the population who depend on agriculture for their food security, for their livelihoods, and the like. Afghanistan's farming systems are mixed. We have crop agriculture, we have livestock, and we have orchards. And as you know, crop production occurs on both rain-fed agriculture and irrigated land as well. In an average year, about 65-70% of crop production, and particularly let me highlight wheat, which is the backbone of Afghanistan's food security and livelihoods. Between 65-70% or so of production will occur on irrigated land. In a drought year, and we've seen way too many of those, and we're seeing more and more of those, as you saw from Azizi's presentation, up to 90-95% of crop production occurs on irrigated land. Also, we mustn't, as well as crop production, the mixed farming systems, we mustn't forget the pastoralists, which also is a vital, vital sector in Afghanistan, often unseen, often misunderstood or poorly understood. This sector as well is absolutely dependent on access to water. And historically, as in so many countries around the world, we also see conflicts linked to access to water for pastoralist populations. This picture here was taken in Herat soon after the earthquake, or the earthquakes late last year. These are all my pictures, by the way. Also, we should understand that agriculture in Afghanistan is incredibly it's not modern, it's traditional. This picture I took a few months ago in Bamyan, an area where they've been farming not for centuries, but for millennia. It's been on the trade routes that traversed Asia for so many thousands of years. But as you can see from this picture, and this picture is taken in a community called Red Village 2, only about 20 miles away from Bamyan center. But look at the roads, look at the irrigation systems, look at the on-farm irrigation. It's incredibly traditional. And this is why water is central to livelihoods, food security, stability, and future growth in Afghanistan. But at the same time, it's also Afghanistan's and the people of Afghanistan's, the men, women, and children, both in rural areas, but also in the cities, as you saw in the previous presentation. It's Afghanistan's biggest single challenge at the moment. But it's also Afghanistan's biggest opportunity. This picture I took last year in Logar, so not so far away from Kabul. These two fields are owned by the same farmer. In one, you can see high quality wheat, which is being provided by FAO, growing beautifully. His other field, the irrigation, the canal had been damaged by some floods earlier in the season. Nothing was planted. You can see the contrast. If you have water and access to water in Afghanistan, you can grow food and feed your family and community. If you don't, nothing occurs. This was a drought year last year. And water, as Azizi's explained, many of you will know, it comes from multiple sources in Afghanistan, from snow, from ice particularly. This is taken between Maidan Wardok and Banyam earlier this year, or from Afghanistan's majestic rivers. Also from the Kadezes, almost these metaphysical systems that bring water from the hills and from springs underground into the communities. Or from groundwater. And this picture here is taken in Panjwai in Kandahar, formerly an area that was growing opium. Now you can see they're growing poppy and they're pumping deeper and deeper and deeper. Elders told us that just 30 years ago when they were younger, water was almost at ground level. 10 years ago it was 30. Now here they're pumping at 90, 100, 110 meters and growing crops that are incredibly water intensive. We have to remember that across Afghanistan, despite the significant investments of the last 20 years, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and multiple other partners, most irrigation systems are highly traditional. You see these types of systems as intakes across the country. So despite the work that has been done, there's an enormous amount to be done. More than 90% of irrigation is traditional. And this is one of the key points. In Afghanistan, the real challenge is not so much the availability of water, it's access to that water. It's about water management, it's about water storage, it's about water utilization. As you saw in that image from Bamyan and across the country, field level irrigation systems are highly inefficient. Water use efficiency is incredibly low. And there's an enormous amount that has been done, but still we're only scratching the surface, literally. There's an enormous amount that needs to be done. And as Azizi said, climate change, you see it everywhere across Afghanistan. You hear it in every conversation with farmers. This was taken in Arghistan in Kandahar towards the Pakistan border. You can see former field patterns. This area has been growing not just for years and decades, but for centuries and centuries, now abandoned because of that slow but relentless creep of climate change. Similarly, this picture was taken in Baghlan, a few hours north of Kabul, earlier this year in mid-May, when we had devastating floods, the worst floods that the communities, even the elders, had ever seen in their lives, which in a matter of hours devastated communities, lives, but also fields and orchards. And these are becoming more and more frequent and more intense and more unpredictable. Similarly, this was taken in Nimroz. These are communities that have been abandoned, not because of conflicts, not because of lack of access to markets, but because of lack of access to water. And the key thing, where I think the opportunity window really does lie, and I hear this in every conversation, there are no climate skeptics in Afghanistan. Every farmer knows about climate change. This was a farmer about 2 years ago in Maidan Wardog, just to the west of Kabul, explaining how the last 30, 40 years, hillsides become eroded, have become deforested because of increased population, also because of increased livestock use, and also obviously deforestation. And as he said, the land in front of him here had been farmed for 7 or 8 generations that he knew of by his family, by his ancestors. And as he told us, for the first time ever, a flash flood caused by climate change, caused by poor human management and response to mitigate those impacts. For the first time ever, his land was no longer being used. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you. This was excellent, and I will come back to you because you sort of hinted to solutions that you've been trying, and I do want to discuss with you on what are really the ways in transforming agriculture in Afghanistan, what are the opportunities and how you do it. But first I want to go to Ms. Charity Watson, who is the Climate, Peace and Security Advisor for the United Nations Assistance Mission Afghanistan, UNAMA. She has worked across humanitarian, political, security and environmental sectors in Afghanistan since 2015, and really laid the foundation for UNAMA's work on climate, peace and security following the August 2021. Over to you to talk about the systemic impacts of climate change also on the peace and security. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Christina, and thank you to all of you who are here today. For those of us that work on Afghanistan that are still in the country now working on this issue, I think water and climate change is something that's very near and dear to our hearts because of the impact that we're seeing already unfold on the Afghan people. As Richard mentioned, part of what we're trying to do with this session is put Afghanistan back on the global water agenda. Since the Taliban took over in August 2021, of course, there are many other challenges that are going on in the country. But day to day, when we or other UN agencies, partners travel around the country, like what Richard said, so many people just are talking about water. I was in Helmand last fall, in one of the districts that were most impacted by the conflict. And community elders were saying, look, of course we want roads, schools, clinics, etc., but none of that matters if we don't have water. So first, I want to talk briefly about climate change. Of course, the previous presenters noted the impacts that we are seeing in the country. And so I want to look at climate change and then sort of tie what they also briefed on together in terms of the impact on water resources, the impact on livelihoods, and then see what does that mean in terms of systemic impacts on the Afghan people. Afghanistan is warming above the global average. Between 1950 and 2020, it saw 1.8 degrees of warming, and that is differentiated by region. So in the south of Afghanistan, which largely covers the Helmand River Basin, that warming is actually 2.4 degrees. It's among the top 10 most vulnerable and least ready states to climate change impacts. And that really is reflected in the impacts on the water cycle and on livelihoods. So I think that what we're seeing is that communities are increasingly caught between cycles of drought and flooding, and they have extremely limited resilience. So when if you look at 40 years of conflict in the country that coincides with underdevelopment as well as weak governance, communities themselves just have no way to deal with these oncoming shocks. So if we look at then the systemic impacts that it's having, I think of course it's having impacts on basic service provision. We see the lack of water availability or access to water having impacts on sanitation, on health, on nutrition, especially for women and children, as well as on education. When water becomes less accessible to communities, it's often children who are collecting water and having to go further distances or having further barriers to that water access hinder their ability to attend school. As Richard mentioned, we're also seeing severe livelihood degradation as a result of these shocks. This, of course, impacts humanitarian need in the sense of, increased food insecurity and, of course, health and nutrition, but also on the overall economy. So Afghanistan's economy, 30% of its GDP comes from agriculture. We're seeing impacts on migration and displacement. In 2022, there were 2.3 million Afghans that were in displacement because of drought, as well as all of the other sort of negative coping strategies that occur when communities are facing this. And then, as Richard alluded to, these have onward impacts that impact peace and stability. So I mentioned the impact of livelihood degradation on migration. Now this adds to tensions between migrants and host communities. That can happen within Afghanistan if they're moving towards urban areas or other communities, but that can also happen with neighboring states, as well as further afield, including here in Europe. It adds to local tensions over resources. We see this particularly with irrigation water, as well as with pasture lands. So Afghanistan has, long-standing nomadic communities that have long-standing transit routes. And if their access to traditional sources of water dries up, then they often have to go towards settled communities that instigates a pressure point between those two. Transboundary dynamics, which Mr. Faizi will present on after me, as well as the way that livelihood degradation can add to the vulnerability to get involved in criminality, including organized crime and narcotics production, which has long been an issue in Afghanistan, social unrest, as well as recruitment into armed groups. And overall, all of these pressures, the water crisis, climate change, it adds a strain on governance and any government's ability to respond, as well as the international community. Because when you have repeated shocks, then more attention needs to be put towards humanitarian efforts, which can take away from trying to address some of the more complex and chronic sources of need in the country. Wanted to say just briefly that the impacts of these are very differentiated by gender. So women and girls are, of course, disproportionately impacted by natural hazard. This is a fact globally in terms of their risk to health and even death from natural disasters. But what we're seeing in Afghanistan is of course, impacts on health, nutrition, when women are also impacted severely by their maternal health, as well as gender-based violence. Children have disruptions to education, as I mentioned. Girls are particularly vulnerable to early marriage when their families come under economic stress. But boys and men are also impacted. Young men and boys are incredibly vulnerable to migration. They're often sent as the first people to migrate and support their families. And then men can be very impacted when we have these conflict risks or security risks. They're often, the actors or the combatants in those risks, and are also vulnerable to mental health issues as a result of livelihood degradation. So I want to end with just saying, what is the current status of the response to this crisis? From the international community side, climate finance to the country still remains largely suspended following the Taliban takeover. There is ongoing aid and ongoing work in the humanitarian sector and basic human needs, but there are declining funds overall to the country, as well as operational challenges. And the types of activities and engagement have been constrained since August 2021. In terms of domestic action that's happening, the Taliban de facto authorities, are active in the water sector. There are ongoing projects and efforts, but they're quite limited in their financing, their capacity, and governance of water. So overall, I think my message to you would be that these impacts are not only on the water sector or on livelihoods, that it has onward impacts across sectors towards the Afghan population. And right now, there's very insufficient action to address these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What you mentioned, I think, is sort of important also for this session, and putting water crisis in Afghanistan back on the global agenda. It's not only the many problems in the country, but also the other crises in the world, which have sort of made us forget what is happening in Afghanistan, because it's not as much in the news, yet the people are really, really impacted. Next, we go back again to a online participant and presenter, Mr. Mohd Faizi. He will, as Charity already said, he will talk about the transboundary dimension and conflict risks and challenges, but also really sort of putting the national water management into the context of the transboundary character of some of the resources. Mr. Faizi is a lecturer and researcher at the IHE Delft Institute for Water Education in the Netherlands, where he focuses on water and environmental governance in fragile countries. And he has previously worked on Afghanistan and transboundary water negotiations, so very interested to hear what, from an academic perspective, you will have to see on the transboundary dimension. Over to you, Faizi. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Christina, and good morning and good afternoon to all of you. Just to build on what has already been said by three presenters before me, I have to mention that the water and the impacts on people's livelihood that we just heard from three presenters, majority of them, but like a large part of these are transboundary. 4 out of 5 Afghanistan's river basins are transboundary. Around 90% of this water flows to downstream regions. And Afghanistan is an ultimate upstream country, positioned at the upstream part of almost all of these rivers. But Afghanistan, due to decades of war, underdevelopment, and conflict, is severely underdeveloped. And particularly its water resources are very underdeveloped compared to downstream neighbors. Therefore, Afghanistan's waters, or transboundary waters in Afghanistan, are inherently political and important for the region. So this was and still is a fundamental aspect of Afghanistan relations with its neighbors. The risk of tensions in transboundary basins of Afghanistan are manifold, spanning multi-scalar dimensions, both within Afghanistan, within its neighbors, but also interstate conflict risks. But at the heart of this is a perceived dichotomy between the development of Afghanistan's water resources and the stability of the region. While underdevelopment of water resources in Afghanistan fuels conflict and stability, as has been explained by previous speakers, the development of this water also is perceived to destabilize the region. So this is at the heart of problem that previously there was a lot of efforts to address. Currently, it's even more complicated. But I have to say, when we talk about tensions and risk of conflict, it doesn't mean an all-out conflict. You can see in this chart the scale of conflicts, which is developed by the Oregon State University. So multi-scalar dimensions of tensions and conflict in Afghanistan is not confined within Afghanistan. So it goes also to other riparian countries, by the way, 9 countries that Afghanistan shared these rivers with, and also the risk of conflict within these countries as well. But it also has region-wide conflict risk, especially for the mechanism that exists for water sharing in the region, but Afghanistan has not been part of, or these mechanisms are not effective enough to address future changes in the water in the rivers due to Afghanistan usage or either by climate change. I'm going to go through this by a river basin by one very briefly, just to exemplify what I have said. But these are detailed in a report, in a forthcoming report that Charity Watson and I have co-authored, and it will be published by United States Institute of Peace, hopefully in the coming months. In the Helmand River Basin, just to exemplify what I meant by multi-scalar and manifold conflict risk, the basin, which is shared with Iran, is very susceptible to drought, and cycles of drought are increasing and intensifying. The groundwater is depleting, and also the shared wetlands that between two countries are drying, which cause biodiversity loss and intensified dust storms, both in Sistan region of Iran, but also in downstream Zaranj province of Afghanistan. On the other side, unilateral infrastructure, both previously and now, are complicating the situation between two countries. For example, the Kamal Khan Dam that was recently, it was inaugurated during previous government, but now it's in functions, is obviating the huge investment that Iranian government has made in Sistan region. The dam is diverting the water inside Afghanistan, and this has caused conflict between Iran. The recent example is in May 2023 when there was a armed conflict between the border guards of two countries. This risk existed, but now are intensified for various reasons. But in addition to interstate conflict risk, there are also intrastate conflict risk within two countries. For example, the ethnic dynamics. Sistan region is a minority populated region which already has discontent and grievances with central government. There were various protests over water security and water scarcity in the region. Similarly, in Afghanistan, the river runs through a region where constituencies living in this basin are highly important for the Taliban government because most of their leadership and their commanders and soldiers come from this basin, and they cannot remain they cannot ignore this fact that these constituencies need water for their livelihood. Similarly, with the Harirut Basin, which is also shared with Iran and Turkmenistan, it's also a highly water scarce region, and this basin has witnessed the most decline in the river flow over the past decade. Unilateral infrastructure has happened. The Dosti or Friendship Dam was built between Turkmenistan and Iran, while Afghanistan has built and is also currently building other dams. So the risk of interstate conflict is high because there is no mechanism for dialogue between Afghanistan and its downstream neighbors. But also because the city of Mashhad, which is located on Iranian side, is an important religious hub and second largest city of Iran, and it is dependent on these water resources. So in case that water supply to Mashhad is affected, it has the risk of more tension between the two countries. If I take you to the Amu Darya Basin in the north, there are also dynamics that could cause intrastate and also interstate conflict. For example, unilateral infrastructure development that happened in the past, countries have had and still have competition over water abstraction from the river. The Karakum Dam, for example, has low water efficiency. But currently, there are two major infrastructure, the Ragun Dam in Tajikistan and the Kushtipa Canal in Afghanistan. Both are scheduled to be completed in 2028, and both are in a status of not fully cooperative manner, at least at this stage, could increase the risk of tension between countries. In addition to that, climate change is adding more pressure, and the river, Amu Darya River, is expected to experience 15 to 20% decline by 2050. So, and the situation currently as it stands is there is limited interaction with Afghanistan, and there is no regional consensus or regional approach towards Afghanistan. The existing water sharing mechanism does not include Afghanistan, and they are also not sufficient to address the situation with the water situation in the region. But in addition to that, there are also intrastate conflict or tension risks. For example, the distribution of the lands around Kushtipa Canal could risk tribal tensions and ethnic tension in northern Afghanistan, while reduction of flow to regions in Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan could risk increased migration and social unrest in Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. The last, Kabul River Basin, similar. Kabul city has a severe water crisis, which was explained by Mr. Azizi. Climate change impacts are high, particularly floods risk are high, both in Afghanistan, but also Pakistan is also susceptible to flood risk. And there are other issues which hinder cooperation, such as refugee issues, the armed groups or TTP, and also the Iran line problem between the two countries. Currently, no cooperation mechanism exists in this basin, and previously planned projects such as Shah Tut Dam, the aim of which is to provide water supply to Kabul. And that dam was funded by India, is currently stopped. But in case this project starts, there are risks of tensions between the two countries, especially if these developments are done without dialogue between two countries. My last slide would be on the challenges to cooperation. Again, the domestic water crisis requires an action. This was, I think, emphasized enough by previous presenters. But this will also have this will have a stabilizing impact on Afghanistan, but also the challenge is how this development could be done, taking into account the consideration downstream, and how cooperation between two countries, between riparians and dialogue could help achieving both goals, which is currently difficult. There are also existing asymmetries in terms of development in this basin, but also in terms of the level of understanding, expertise, and knowledge. Strong public statements, sentiments around water exist. This is partly because water nationalism. Afghanistan is an upstream country, but also because of a sense of historic disenfranchisement, because most of the development in downstream region was without Afghanistan's consultation and was unilateral. So there is a sense that, okay, Afghanistan also has to do the same. Especially in the current situation, most of these projects are used or symbolized as a national symbol to also gain national legitimacy. But overall, in the region, as I mentioned, regional water sharing mechanisms are not effective. Even in case of the Helmand River, which there is a treaty, it has not been implemented. And that's also disincentivized Afghanistan. Okay, when one treaty doesn't work, why do we have to have another treaty in other basins, especially if it prevents us from developing our water resources? And on top of that, climate change as a threat multiplier, it adds more pressure on both Afghanistan and also neighboring countries. These challenges existed before, but they are now exacerbated by a Taliban takeover because there is no recognition, there is no interaction, or at least interaction the way it was before. And most of the experts left Afghanistan. And for gaining the legitimacy, Taliban also are more inclined to pursue this project unilaterally because at some points, some of this cooperation might be perceived as kind of, how to say it, if they, for example, have this cooperation, it might also undermine their legitimacy. So I'll stop here. Sorry, I think I went a minute or two beyond time. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Good to take a little bit extra time to take us through the complexities of the 4 transboundary basins of Afghanistan, and also for highlighting this catch-22 situation where, as Charity explained, underdevelopment within the country risks conflict and instability due to host community and pastoralist and agriculturalist issues, but then also because Afghanistan is the water tower in the region, this risk of development actually then increasing regional instability or at least tensions. Next, I would like to invite my colleague, Ximin Mao, who is a senior water specialist at the World Bank, to talk to us about actually addressing Afghanistan's water crisis and talking about what is being done to assist in the current situation. Ximin leads the World Bank's water sector engagement in Afghanistan and has more than 10 years of work experience across water and environment, and not only in Afghanistan, but also in other regions. I had the pleasure working with her in Central Asia. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Christina. Well, I hope by now, my other panelists have given you a vivid picture of what the water crisis in Afghanistan looks like. And as Christina mentioned, we are also actively trying to see how can we help them address these challenges. Where's it? Can we go to the next slide? It's not here. There you go. Thank you. So let me also try to bring everything together first. You know, water, as the other panelists have mentioned, is becoming essential in providing health, providing economic productivity, but also help Afghanistan adapt to the changing climate. If Afghanistan could get reliable water for its people, it can protect public health, it will help them improve their income for millions. But as the other panelists presented, we're facing a unprecedented water crisis because of decades of underinvestment, because of fragile water institution, and which reached the point of what we consider as economic water insecurity, meaning it doesn't mean there's not enough water, but because it's not well managed. And then the Afghanistan community actually have been coping with this for decades, as Richard has mentioned, largely through self-organization. But now they are facing this looming challenge from climate change, which could further accentuate the risk of water shortage. And as Mr. Azizi already showing to you, it's most evident in some of the urban centers, for example, in Kabul. Because a lot of these urban centers 100% rely on groundwater resources, but they are depleting. And women and children shoulders most of these consequences because of lack of drinking water and sanitation services. And this lack of capacity to cope with the spatial and temporal variability of water resources led to what we describe as a service gap. 10 million people right now do not have access to basic drinking water services. 20 million do not have access to basic sanitation. 22 million are vulnerable to floods and drought risks, and 6 million hectares of arable land do not have access to irrigation services. As a conclusion, Afghanistan and its development partners needs to invest in an ambitious multi-year national program to help them access reliable water to its people and close the service gap in drinking water and sanitation and help the community build resilience against climate-induced water extremes. But how do we achieve that? Actually, and also faces some challenges. Specifically, after I spent some time also in Afghanistan, there's really scarce resources now. The funding that's supporting Afghanistan is shrinking. We have very limited data, even though we can put together a picture of the water crisis going on. Compared to a typical country, we still don't have enough information to put together a science-based solution space. And the approach itself is quite fragmented. That's why, after consulting with other development partners, donors, and NGOs on the ground, we conclude that there's a need for a coordinated and comprehensive approach for Afghanistan's water sector. And one of the effort from the World Bank side is what we call the Afghanistan Water Platform. This is co-chaired with UNAMA. The objective is to maximize the benefits and impacts of assistance in Afghanistan from the water sector. We try to keep this initiative as transparent and open as inclusive, so it includes all the active UN agencies working in the water sector in Afghanistan, the donors, and international local NGOs, as well as academia. And, so far we have, since its launch in February this year, we have formed 4 subgroups trying to reach a shared understanding of the water challenges on the ground, but also try to form a unified agenda for action. The 4 subgroups are water resources management, wash irrigation, and transboundary water. And so far, we have done technical consultations with key stakeholders on some of the pressing issues, for example, groundwater management. Because the country right now still have very high reliance on groundwater, but that critical resource has been depleting. We need to think about collectively how to help them address that issue. Underpinning this platform and to support this initiative, World Bank also launched what we called Afghanistan Water Analysis and Knowledge Program, AWAC. We're trying to, because currently the evidence base to support the water sector is anecdotal, siloed, and somewhat fragmented. And we're trying to use this initiative to help us to get an updated and informed understanding of the water sector in Afghanistan. And these knowledge will also help us in terms of thinking, planning, and investment strategies for the future. And together, all of these coordinated efforts will help us come up with a more comprehensive and coordinated approach to address Afghanistan's ongoing water crisis. Let me stop here, and we can also answer your additional questions in the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
We'll take it in a panel discussion first. Stay here. Please stay here, Shimin, because then we can have a better discussion. And Charity, if you can come as well. We'll have a virtual and in-room panel trying to have. So basically, to summarize, and I think it's been very clear from all the presentations, there's a severe water crisis that impacts livelihoods of 40+ million people, and the current situation is challenging, and there are a lot of needs. So what I would like to try to do now is dig a little bit deeper. Shimin has just started talking about what is being done to address the crisis, but I think we should discuss in more detail. And I wanted to go first back to Mr. Azizi. So you sort of lay the ground on where we are with the water resources. From a purely technical perspective, Richard mentioned, there's very traditional agriculture and infrastructure is not on the most modern state. But from a technical perspective, Mr. Azizi, what is needed to stabilize the water crisis in the country?
Thank you, Christina. Actually, to stabilize the water crisis in Afghanistan, to be honest, we need a comprehensive approach, action, planning to address all both the infrastructure, development of the system, and even though engagement of the communities in research and studies. And this all could be through IWRM system, integrated water resources management. Before 2009, the water law in Afghanistan established the foundation of a modernized water management in Afghanistan. Why? Because on that time, before 2009, the water resources in Afghanistan mostly was managed through political boundaries. Even though we had a lot of internal conflicts, beside what Faizi Saib already explained on transboundary, but I'm talking on the inside of the country, we had a lot of problem during the water allocation and water management inside of the countries. That is why the government on that time, with a lot of international experts, and I'm happy I see all of my previous colleagues who was engaged for those processes. Is still a lot of the main stakeholders and our partners here. So we established this IWRM approach. Because if you look to the Kunduz River Basin, if some of you have already visited Kunduz River Basin actually doesn't have a water resources. They are on the very downstream, only they are a consumption of water. But if you see the water is coming from Bamyan and Baghlan, on that time, the Bamyan and Baghlan was claimed. Kunduz doesn't have a right to use the water because the water is from Bamyan. That is why we established this IWRM to break the political boundaries. So this is what I'm looking. If we look to improve and work through our IWRM approach, that is also can lead to reduce the water crisis and even do the conflict inside of the country. So this watershed management is one of the best practice on the IWRM concepts. And the watershed management, mostly, this is a decentralized system that we can engage all the water users, main stakeholders, even though the ladies, genders, and also farmers, water user associations. We establish a lot of number of meetup system. They are the main user of water. So engagement of this all could be one of the solution technically to improve the management and also reduce the level of crisis. So if I exactly come to the part of infrastructure, we can find the infrastructure in the context of watershed management, because construction of a big dams in Afghanistan was a big challenge for us in the previous government as well. And there was also a lot of issues with the international partners, like not giving the objections because of the transboundary issue. That is why we couldn't stop our water behind the dams to use on the drought period. So if now we change a little bit and under this circumstance to have more practice on watershed practice to establish the small dams, medium dams, and also modernize the irrigation system and each watershed, because on each watershed, the causes and challenges different. If we see to the south part of Afghanistan, to the north part, from the west to the east, we have many different, many challenges is water-related challenge, which the method can be different. We cannot apply actually one system in one methods from one region to other region. So this the watershed and also irrigation is the main part which they consume a lot of water, but looking to the shortage of water in Afghanistan, the system is not modernized. They are using the traditional method. So to save the water wastage, we need actually to modernize this system. But if I come to the water supply part in the cities, is actually to the populated cities. For example, water supply, most of the people is not access to the water supply. So looking to this water supply, we have two alternatives. One is to enhance the...
Sorry, I need to cut you a little bit short here, so we give the others as well a little bit of time to speak. But I want
just in groundwater. If I add two more points. Two more points. To coming to actually to the groundwater, you already saw in my presentation the cobble. Like there is two solutions actually. The infrastructure to recharge might be a supplementary solution, but the most important solution is to bring surface water to the cobble city. Looking to this, for example, we have the nearest source, that is Panjshir River Basins, Lugar, and even though we have Paghman, but the most sustainable is Panjshir, which is already, if we bring 4 cubic meter, that will be supply water for 5 million people in the country. So this 5 million people can reach to safe water. And also, I don't know if I have the chance for the future to add something, or
one last point, but
one last point is monitoring system, because because I touch a lot in the glacier. So in my presentation there was actually a lot of things. So I discussed with Charoti how I can explain the keywords, because it's for a technical person is difficult to speak in a large number. There is a lot of policies and donors, but in the glacier and snow, we already have very good system for hydrological monitoring stations. It can help a lot for decision analysis, but what is gaps is glacier and snow monitoring systems, which can support in the future for the decision makers. So, and also for existing station, I have a big concern because I was on the part of the establishment of this system. I met you many times, Christina, in India. So we spoke about the stations, the operation and maintenance. I don't know how they can keep these stations to be active. These all systems, data and infrastructure can be technically a solution of water resources.
Thank you. And thank you for making the last point, because I fully agree that monitoring is the key to water resources management. If we don't know what we have, we can't manage it. And yeah, I mean, the measurement station, as you pointed out, is sort of a traditional problem we run into in many countries, is the O&M system and really keeping monitoring networks alive. But I want to get back to your first point that you made about integrated water resources management and really sort of working on all levels, including communities. And I get to Richard on that, because I think you were referring to the partners who were working with you in 2009, and FAO has been there for decades. And I know FAO has worked with you a lot on this. So I want to go and ask Richard how the FAO, you know, you've been in Afghanistan for a very long time, and you have continued throughout, even after August 2021, to support the country. How do you engage? How do you navigate the systems, and how do you implement the programming right now?
Thanks so much, Christina. So beginning back in late sort of Q3, Q4, 2020, a really acute drought hit Afghanistan, and that persisted well into last year. And in fact, it had a rather nasty sting in its tail, which took us through to Q1 this year. And of course, the enormous economic impact in multiple ways of August, that followed the transition in August 21, plunged Afghanistan and its people into deep crisis. We have to remember that late 21, early 22, it was in the world's largest hunger crisis, 22.8 million people, 55% of the population facing acute food insecurity. And despite all the political challenges with the international community, an enormous amount of resources came in, but very much at the start focused on the humanitarian crisis, first and foremost in the food security sector, but also in the health sector, education sector, many other sectors as well. In that time, FAO established its largest program in the world. And this is important to remember, that despite the many challenges, the international community has been extremely generous. However, most of our program is focused on food security, food production, helping farmers produce more food, men and women in communities and across the country, all 34 provinces. And we did this very much shoulder to shoulder with our sisters and brothers at the World Food Programme, and of course our incredible international and national NGO partners. However, and this I have to recognise and acknowledge the incredible foresight and I think boldness of the World Bank. Everybody recognised, and if you remember, I said that in a drought year, 95% of food production occurs in irrigated land. We were able to continue a very scaled down water program. And as Christina said, we've been working in the water sector for decades in Afghanistan, often shoulder to shoulder with the World Bank and the ADB and of course the ministries. But since 2021, we have been able to put in place, as part of this integrated approach, albeit a post-21 version, there's been a lot of work. 597 kilometers of canal have been rehabilitated or constructed in some areas. 700,000 medium and larger check dams have been built. A lot of riverbank protection to protect communities from the impact of flash floods, which are becoming more and more significant. And also a lot of work to put groundwater back into the ground, trenches, check dams, and I think until about now, 7,000 very small, stone dams and gully plugs and the like, just trying to slow down the water, get it back into the ground rather than heading into really damaging flash floods. So there has been quite a lot of work that has been done, and whilst FAO is by far the largest player in the international community in Afghanistan in the water sector, I should highlight the work of other agencies as as well, obviously WFP and UNDP from the UN side and IOM, but also many of the NGOs who also are working there. So there is work being done. And I think, and you heard Zamin talking about the World Bank's vision, carrying that on from its work in the last 20 plus years as well. There has been a lot done, but obviously it's constrained by A, the humanitarian priorities, and B, also the political complexities. And just before I close, just let me talk about briefly the question of how we work with the ministries as well. It's highly complex, all the reasons you can imagine. But we know that whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's any country in the world, we, the international community, can't be working on our own. We do work closely, we coordinate, we share information with the two main ministries involved in the water sector. Obviously, there's Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation and Livestock, MAIL. There's also Ministry of Energy and Water, which was for some time known as Nawara. We do coordinate with them. We discuss, we share, but it's very different to how it was pre-August 21. One of the big issues, of course, is that we're not in a position to provide technical assistance or financial resources or assets to those ministries. But we have found a place and a space for coordinating closely. And because, as I said, every single conversation you have with a farmer, 75% of the population, male or female in Afghanistan, will, whatever the subject, will end up talking about water. It's something where I think we've been able to establish a very permissive space in terms of that coordination. It's not the same as it was before 21. It's very much humanitarian and crisis focused. It's short term, a lot of the work we're doing, but there is a lot going on. I think that's really important. But as I travel around the country, rather than saying that's great, lots has been done, and lots has been done, it's just the fact that you can sense you're only scratching the surface, literally, and there's so much more that needs to be done, whether we're back to the large-scale investments of former years or just simply pushing what is being done at the moment across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And I wanted to sort of pose a similar question to you, Charity, since UNAMA is sort of officially mandated to engage with the de facto administration. It's been 3 years now. Still same environment, it's not a recognized administration. There are lots of calls for this engagement. Why is it so important to engage, and how do you do it from the UN side, in addition to FAO? Why are we there?
Sure, thanks, Christina. Why are we there? Because there's still 40 million people in the country. And those 40 million people are the ones who are facing the brunt of this crisis, as you know, so many of us have explained. It's also a crisis that's happening now. This is not decades in the future. You know, the Kabul water crisis that was explained in terms of groundwater, that is not decades, it's years until that groundwater is almost entirely depleted, right? And so there's no option to wait to engage and to wait to try to take action on this issue. You know, our mandate, at the heart of our mandate, is actually the Afghan people, is staying engaged for the benefit of Afghans. You know, the de facto authorities, they have acknowledged the water challenges, and it's an area where technical engagement has produced some outcomes. And so, you know, we just believe that engagement is important to have the best outcomes for the Afghan people, and that they shouldn't face these challenges alone.
Thank you. We'll take that again as at the end as a key message. We do need to think about the people that no longer make the news. They are still there. They need us. I wanted to go back also to Mr. Faizi, because while we're looking at what can be done for the Afghan people, he explained to us the challenge of the transboundary nature of the research with resource with Afghanistan being the water tower. And Faizi, you know the complexities of negotiations having been involved on transboundary waters. And now you have the opportunity to look at it from the academic perspective at IHE, which does a lot of that research on how to engage in transboundary negotiations. What can neighboring countries and other stakeholders do in this situation? And also, you know, would things like track 2 dialogue and these things, would that work in addition to working within the country, but also then considering sort of transboundary complexities?
Thank you, Christina. Absolutely, absolutely. And I have explained that conflict risks have previously existed in Afghanistan's transboundary basins, but there were efforts to build capacity and also increase understanding over transboundary cooperation. There was also political will to engage with neighboring countries, and there were many processes with Uzbekistan, with Tajikistan, with Turkmenistan, with Iran over water issues, but also putting water as one element of regional cooperation and integration. I mean, I have to mention that sharing only water was and still is perceived as a sole obligation for Afghanistan as a late developing upstream country in a historically unjust context. So that was and still is in the minds of Afghans. So a lot of our efforts at the national level was to change that toward a situation where Afghanistan could also benefit from cooperation in transboundary waters. But what has changed now? There is a severe lack of capacity. Many experts left Afghanistan. There is a lack of understanding over the transboundary dimensions. And that also contributes to lack of understanding about the trade-offs, the opportunity cost. And that's not only in Afghanistan. The region still is far beyond getting there. And in addition to that, water is a very highly sensitive topic for many countries for many understandable reasons. So having an approach where countries see their benefits, perhaps reframing it within a broader context of climate or water, energy, food, environment nexus, or integrated water management at a transboundary level where everybody's benefits and concerns are taken into account. But for that, I would say we need to create more opportunities for interactions, for dialogue, for capacity building, and for knowledge generation. Currently, there is lack of that opportunities because of the situation in Afghanistan. So for capacity development, this is important, not only for Afghanistan, but also for the region, just to level the field. So everybody can trust, have some trust and confidence in the process, but also to ensure that future dialogue is informed and substantive. And it should extend beyond water to other sectors such as energy, such as food and agriculture, even trade. In addition to that, I think joint research and knowledge generation is very important. And because this information exchange and this development of science and evidence-based solution will help us identifying those trade-offs in a more informed manner. And for this, of course, we need a way of interaction, like where we do interact. If currently it's difficult, given the political circumstances, there are different ways to do it, like track 1.5, and even if that's difficult, track 2, where people come together, they talk about the problems, and they find solution, or they build some understanding, and that understanding could help countries to move forward. I know it's not a very big move, but as Charity said, this is a problem that's happening and will continue to worsen. We cannot wait for years and then say, okay, now we have to come and talk. The situation now, for example, in some of these basins that I have explained are already in a very dire situation. So there are risk of conflicts and the risk are very high. Supporting countries to have these interactions and supporting with the knowledge and with the research is also important. We have regional organizations that are doing good research. They could also be supported by global center of excellence. On various parts that previous speaker explained. I don't want to go to details, but what is important to have that interactions in whatever way possible, build that capacity, and also build that understanding among countries that what is the opportunity cost, but what could be achieved through cooperation over water.
Thank you, Faizi. Shimin, Faizi mentioned the capacity development and also sort of the importance of evidence-based capacity development. And if I understood, the Afghanistan Water Platform and that knowledge platform is doing preparing a lot of the evidence base. What else can be done? Can there be outreach to actors, to track to civil society? that could help. What are also the lessons we'll have this week? A lot of this discussions about countries who are facing water crises, like also Somalia, Iraq. Are there lessons for other countries that we can draw from Afghanistan, or lessons that we can still bring to Afghanistan?
Yeah. As we are sharing with you in this session, the need from the water sector is enormous, and it's urgent, but the resources are limited. So that's why we are, putting a lot of effort in thinking about how can we form collective and coordinated actions among all the stakeholders in Afghanistan, and informed by rigorous research or updated information. And I think that problem or challenge is common across many of these countries you just mentioned in the fragile situation. So I think that's one effort that can be probably shared or considered elsewhere as well. And then I have to say, since the launch of this Afghanistan Water Platform in February this year, it was very nice to see that the water sector, the water communities, are very focused and are very eager to work together and then, develop some joint actions. Because this transition since 2021, we also realized there's a lot of rich knowledge, but it has been scattered because of that transition process. So this platform is also an effort trying to understand and taking stock of, who's doing what and where, just so we, put everybody together with a centralized sort of a knowledge base, so we don't have any duplication of efforts and a waste of very limited resources. And I think that aspect is important to continue when we are thinking about, how can we address these urgent needs going forward. And I think that's the same approach that can be also shared elsewhere.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, let me stop here.
Thank you also for that last point, the importance of really sort of work together as partners to make the few resources that are there, and there are very few, to go as far as possible, and therefore really, really closely coordinate across all the partners. And I think Afghanistan is one of the countries where this works very well and has sort of a tradition which luckily has continued. I do want, we took a little bit longer with the panel discussion, but I do want to open for questions from the audience as well as from online. I see 2 hands up.
I see many, actually.
Oh no, I see many more. I'm blinded by the by the lights. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Very short questions. Please, we'll start here in the, yeah.
It is difficult to short question, but thank you very much. I'm Kenji Nagata from JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency. I was working in Afghanistan for 2.5 years for Ministry of Energy and Water, and working together with Azizi, and now I'm working together with Richard for the irrigation project. I think Afghanistan's water crisis is the not only the risks, but it is the problems of lives or death, I think. So I think we need to increase our assistance to Afghanistan. It is, as I told you, it is the problem of death or lives or death. It is same as Ukraine and Gaza, I think. So international community has to more looking at Afghanistan, especially as Richard said, Afghanistan needs water, and water. So, my question, sorry, it's a little bit longer. My question is how do we increase? Do we mean international community or many donors? How do we increase assistance to Afghanistan in water sectors? I know international community or many assistant donors.
I need to stop you there.
Discussing many, but how? That is my question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. We'll collect the questions and then I'll hand them to the panel because otherwise I think we won't. We have a very hard cutoff at 12:30. Yeah, there was one more question here, and then there were several over there, and we have online questions too. So really, please keep it short.
Thanks. I'm Timo Gaasbeek, Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thanks for very interesting presentations. While the presentation was going on, I realized no one's talking about precipitation. And I looked at the precipitation time series in CHIRPS and CRU for Afghanistan, and there's actually on CHIRPS an increase in rainfall and precipitation, and in CRU it's stable. So the problem does not seem to be the precipitation, but the fact that it runs off too quickly, and that seems to me that the solution should be much more on keeping the water on the slopes than anything else, rather than working downstream on getting it used better. So question on focus and priorities.
Thank you. We will address that question at the end to Mr. Sisi, which also I think it's something that Richard mentioned about the land use changes in Afghanistan, which lead to increased velocity of runoff. Yeah, we'll have to go to the other side here.
Hi. Thanks for the discussion, and I'm Sonu Kanal from Future Water Netherlands. And my question is how private sector and IFIs can help improve the access issue in short to medium term horizon. And also what is the way forward to adapt and build against climate change, considering transboundary cooperation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Mark Zaytoun, Geneva Water Hub. Thanks very much for putting this, hosting this session, trying to get Afghanistan back in the water world. You won't have time to answer it, but my question, probably mostly for Faizi, would be to what extent do the sanctions on the country and in relation to the DFA affect the ability for all the good work that's trying to be done within Afghanistan? Thank you. And if there's anything we can do about it, others can do it.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry, Mark, I didn't see you behind. You were sitting right behind the light.
Yes. Hi, my name is Mushfiq, and I am PhD student at Leibniz Institute based off Germany. So I'm originally from Afghanistan. My question is somehow similar to others, but I really wondering to know that how these diverse stakeholders like government, community, industries and international organization can work together efficiently to address all these challenges. Just one example, as I remember in 2019, a smart water project by supporting USAID established water river basin councils, which had 25 members, which all of them was men. Even in the official documentation, we had IWRM, which one of the main paradigms of IWRM is the main role of women in the water resource management. But so anyway, I just wanted to just highlight that in official documentation, there are some approach, some good things, but not in reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Was there one more up there? Yeah, one more question. We'll take, you have, yeah.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My name is Arjun. I'm a graduate student at Yale School of Environment. My question is specifically related to groundwater crisis that you mentioned. And like, of course, Afghanistan's political complexities are massive, but groundwater crisis exists in many other parts of the world. And like, as far as my knowledge goes, I don't think we have found a solution of how to manage groundwater, even in places where there's much more political stability. So even after we gather the data and the knowledge that you're trying to gather through community, through the network, do we have any idea of how and what kind of groundwater regimes we can try in Afghanistan for better management of the resource?
Thank you. And then I would also like to ask Shishi to see whether we have questions from the virtual audience.
Yeah, actually, we have a huge participants of a lot of expertise on Afghanistan Online, a lot of questions. Just selecting two of the most popular one. One is on what's the current status of the Kwash Tepa Canal and the current downstream perspective of it. And another question, which I also personally find interesting, is how are the women and girls particularly impacted by the water issues?
Thank you. Thank you very much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just distribute those questions to the individual panelists and also ask them, while they respond, to give us their take-home message. I would like to start with the point on precipitation and groundwater management for Assisi. What's the story about precipitation, and do we have a solution for groundwater in the Kabul Basin in specific? I think we should use the specific case studies.
Thank you, Christina.
1 minute.
Yeah, just coming. Okay, just very briefly that precipitation in Afghanistan is changing the form from snow to rainfall, and also the affected province is from the monsoon is also severely affected, that there is a lot of flash floods. That is why I have introduced already watershed management approach that is working from the inside of the watersheds to much more stabilize on slope, land use management, and also to work on the very upstream of the river basins to reduce the risk of the flood induced by heavy rainfall, because most of this heavy rainfall, which is induced flash flood, is because of the deforestations the people is doing, and also the people is cutting down mountains stumps. So we must introduce alternatives before going to the people, because the people doesn't access to the energy, doesn't access to the livelihood necessaries for cooking and also for their life. So such as these things, if we focus more on the watershed practice, it's one of the sustainable solutions, and also it's direct to the precipitations induce flash floods.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to go and Mark, we have one rule for this session. We're not discussing politics, but we're discussing water. So I want to put to Faisi the question on the climate change impact on transboundary waters and how that might impact the dynamics. And again, keep it to the science of the aspect.
Thank you, Christina. I think I kind of explained it, but like in every basin, there were a lot of details that I had to escape because of the time issue. And like in the Helmand River Basin, if I give an example, like the core of the conflict in 2023 was drought, whether there was a drought or not. But Afghan side was saying, okay, the lack of water in the basin is due to recurrent drought, but the Iranian side didn't agree to. So this was one example, like they couldn't agree because they don't have a good mechanism, but also the understanding around climate change and drought was also not sufficient, especially on the Afghan side. And these droughts are recurring more frequently and more intense, as was explained by other speakers. So this adds more kind of conflictive dynamics in transboundary basins, because each time you have a drought, you will have some sort of tension between Afghanistan and Iran if the situation continues to be like this. Another example is the Al Darya Basin, which kind of the variability in the flow is changing. There are more dry years, but there are also more intense wet years predicted. And also the overall river flow is expected to decline. So these changes, if there is no cooperation and if there is an ongoing infrastructure project in upstream countries, it will eventually, will come to the fact, okay, it's not climate change, it is this simple project. If you don't have dialogue and if you don't have understanding. So it's simply, maybe, they will affect everyone, but lack of cooperation and dialogue would probably lead to tension, and it will start a vicious cycle where each side blame each other, and that kind of close the window for more cooperation, because at some points it will be more difficult for countries to engage once they have traded a lot of blames.
Yeah, thank you very much, and also pointing to the need, this importance of the shared knowledge base and the shared understanding of a basin, including in the transboundary context. The next one, I wanted to give that one to Richard. How do we increase assistance to Afghanistan?
Thanks, Christina, and excellent questions. Let me speak very quickly to that and touch on some of the others, and then I'll heed your invitation to share that one last burning point that I'd like to make, but I'll be super quick. How do we increase international assistance to water, for the water sector and for Afghan people and their concerns with water? I think there's sort of three principal ways. One, sessions like this, the Stockholm World Water Week, just raising awareness, providing the evidence, the data, the stories as well, I think is absolutely key, because yes, Afghanistan faces many challenges, both political, but other ones as well. But it's really important people understand the situation and how this affects Afghan people. Secondly, and I think JICA is a perfect example. JICA, obviously, the government of Japan has been a friend of Afghanistan for decades. They've been there. But since 21, they've been an absolute pioneer when it comes to the water sector. And as I say, we and others have had support for work in the sector. But also the government of Japan was the first Western embassy to reopen after the political transition in August. They've been there ever since. I've travelled across the country and over to the east with the ambassador and his teams as well. I think it's just to see and to communicate, and also to provide that support. Yes, mindful of the many challenges and complexities in Afghanistan today, but always pushing, and the government of Japan and the World Bank and others, the US also, have been absolutely, have really shown, I think, the way forward, because it boils down to money. And the third part of this is prioritization. And I think that's absolutely key, because it's a multipolar crisis. There's multipolar opportunities as well. But I think the whole question of prioritizing, if you listen to the United Nations leadership in Afghanistan, they also will focus on water, climate impact, and agri-food system transformation linked to that, the so-called water, climate, food nexus. The longer you spend in Afghanistan, the more that you listen to Afghan men and women in communities as well, you will realize that is one of the key priorities, along with health, along with education as well. But I think prioritization. Very quickly, on the question of precipitation, I think Azizi gave a very clear answer. I hear in community after community, north, south, west, and east. And as we know with climate change, it's not just the volume of water, the quantity, it's also the timing, etc. In the east this year, Q4 last year, hardly any rain, which is normal. It's, January, February this year, hardly any rain. Lots came, precipitation and rain and snow at the end of Q1, but it came at the wrong time. It came very late. So this is a thing which you hear time and time again. A small thing as well, Faizi has mentioned dust storms in the west and particularly in the south, in Helmand,
Richard,
in Kandahar, Nimroz. You hear about it all the time. I was caught in a dust storm very recently.
I cannot allow you to speak to each question. We are already 3 minutes over time. We're already being kicked out.
Super quick last point. Yes, we've talked about crisis. We've talked about the many challenges. but also there are enormously positive things happening in Afghanistan. The food security crisis I talked about, the worst in the world in 2022, the reduction by almost 50% of the number of hungry people because of the resilience of Afghan people, the incredible hard work and the work the international community has done. That reduction is unprecedented, and water and obviously support to agriculture has been absolutely key in that. So it's not just about dealing with a crisis, it's also laying down pathways for sustainable growth going forward. Positive things are happening. It's not all crisis. It's not all doom and gloom in Afghanistan. Thank you, and apologies, Christina and colleagues.
No, thank you. And thank you for ending it with this positive message, because I think this is also an important point that came out through the discussions and through the presentations. I wanted to give the question on, because also a question that I had is like, can the private sector do something? I wanted to give that to you, Shimin, since you're leading the Afghanistan Water Platform.
Yes, I think to my own surprise, after I start working in Afghanistan, they actually have a very vibrant private sector. And then in many ways, they are also active in providing some of the solutions. I mean, Richard also knows by working with farmers, and then the private sector is also very active in helping the part of the solution of developing livelihoods. I have seen examples, for example, of private-led factories making reusable pads, which in a country in Afghanistan, it's not it's a bit unusual, but that shows you there's a very active private sector participation. And then, we are also trying to see, whether they can help us think about some of the solutions. For example, the World Bank is also supporting one aspect of it. There's this project component focusing on exploring whether there is a possibility to help farmers access to solar-powered water pump for surface water irrigation. And we are engaging with private energy service providers. So there are quite a bit examples on how we can working with private sector to both in terms of providing technical solutions, but also sort of crowding in some of those financing from the private sector investors, trying to, as we're talking about funding sources to bridging that kind of gap. Also want to very quickly talk about, how can we stretch, channeling more resources into the water sector. Those of us working in the sector knows it's both sort of a fortune, but also curse that water is everywhere. It's scattered. That's why we are also trying to form very integrated solutions, working with different sectors, agriculture, working with health, education, trying to address water challenges through different channels, and that's another way of stretching each dollar a little bit further. That are the efforts that we are trying also right now. Thank you.
Excellent. I think we're sort of ending on the opportunities, and I wanted to give you the last words, so to say, Charity. There was one question: how do these diverse stakeholders work together, and what are the opportunities there that you see?
Sounds good. So I'll make 2 points. I will take Mark's question on sanctions, but just from a clarifying perspective, there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. The sanctions are not on the state of Afghanistan. They're not on the government of Afghanistan. They are on individuals and entities associated with the Taliban, as well as there's UN Security Council Resolution 2615 that gives humanitarian exemptions to those sanctions, as well as general licenses in the US that give wide-ranging exemptions. So there's a lot of space to work on issues within this context. On this question of working together amidst diverse stakeholders, I mean, the start is getting in the same room and talking to each other, understanding the challenges, having those technical experts from different sectors bring in both the current status of things, but also the solutions. And I think we cannot work across stakeholders, including the de facto authorities on the ground, unless we don't talk and engage and work together to find solutions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the patience of the audience. Sorry we went over. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thanks to those who joined from afar while on a stopover. Thank you. I'm very happy that you ended on a positive note. There are opportunities. I think it's the creativity of all the stakeholders that are engaged to find ways to address the water crisis that affects the people of Afghanistan. Thank you very much. Thank you.